community in an online, in all of your classes, really. Everything we talk about is fitting for your face-to-face, your synchronous, and your asynchronous courses. But this is something that I really take to heart. Um, as many of you know, I spent 20 years in the classroom, and during that time, I really came to learn just how important community was. And so much of what you do in the classroom, and so much of what you can bring in, comes when you are actually connecting with your students and when your students are connecting with you. And so this is really an important topic to take up. And as we start to think about what that looks like in an electronic environment, in some ways it changes things, but in a lot of ways, it really, really doesn't. So we have a few things that we're going to do today that I think are important for us to talk about. First, we're going to identify the importance of community. We're going to talk about what it actually is and why we should care. We're going to start to talk about some different techniques that can help to establish community before and during the semester. And at the end of all of this, we're going to dig in and say, okay, what can we actually do now? What are the next steps? And what do I want to do to create a sense of community with my students? Please note that this session is being recorded. We think it's important that you know that we will also be talking about some different views of the chat area. We just want to be fully transparent on that. Please feel free to put your thoughts, your ideas in the chat box to all participants. You can also feel free to connect with me privately, to connect with Elizabeth privately, and to connect with each other privately too. We value that form of interaction. In fact, that's one of the things we're going to talk about in this session. But it is important to note that while not so with Webex, if you're using Zoom, you'll want to let your students know that if they are chatting privately, those private messages are saved in the entire chat history. So what is being said from student to student privately isn't actually private. Back when we did this switch, when everything happened so quickly, there was kind of a common refrain where people were saying, um, well, my students want face to face. You know, everything that they're telling me is they want face to face. And as Melissa Wheeler noted, when students were saying that, what they were actually asking for is that they wanted their community. They wanted that sense that they were a part of something. They wanted that sense that the people that they used to interact with were still there for them. So it wasn't necessarily that they wanted to see each other in Zoom or WebEx. It wasn't necessarily that they had to make that sort of eye-to-eye contact. What it was is they just wanted to stay connected. The problem is when we took this major switch back in March, a lot of us had had time with our students already. We'd had the ability to kind of gain that sense of connection where our students knew who we were, they knew who each other were, and so that there was already built into what was going on a sense of community just from the interaction. Now, I want to throw a caveat in here. We shouldn't assume that just because students are sitting in a physical environment together that they actually have a sense of community. We shouldn't assume that just because we are sitting in a physical environment with our students that community actually happens. Because really what it comes down to is community is something that is constructed. Before we jump into that, though, before we really dig into what community is, I want to ask you to stop and think about how you define community. So when you think of it, what is it? And also think about how you've inspired a sense of community in your past classes. So take a couple minutes to just to ponder that, write down your ideas, and then place them in the chat box, please. And you're both right. Community is trust. And that's a big part of what family is all about too. Yeah, those personal relationships, being able to be honest with each other, feeling comfortable, being able to take risks. That's a huge sign of a strong community. Supporting each other, finding a place where you can be playful and be vulnerable, be heard and understood. Definitely. Sharing the burdens. One that was really good. There's so many wonderful things that are coming through right now, and they're coming through so quickly. One that I saw back a little bit. I'm sorry, I didn't see who posted it. Was that you don't all have to agree, but you have to be able to chat together. And yes, I love that. The use of we showing that we're in it together. Definitely. And students talking to each other and not just talking to the professor. That back and forth. Nice, nice. So we have this strong sense of what community looks like, and we're also getting a sense of how this has been created, being available to your students, being human, being able to connect with who they are, finding ways to get your students to talk once again across those spaces and not just unilaterally. Are there other things that you're doing that you're doing to make sure that you create a sense of community in your class? Sharing, supporting, being open, making sure that people are heard. Any other thoughts? Nice. The student lounge discussion, that's a great one, especially for asynchronous environments. Thank you for bringing that up. We're going to get to that. That's awesome. One of the things that I love about the answers that are coming through is there's truly this sense that community is about actual relationships. Community is about people understanding each other. Community is about being able to talk, being able to interact, and being able to know. None of these things really truly have to happen in a synchronous environment. It might be that aids it in some ways, but we can still foster these things. We can still find the common interests, as has been posted just now, and helping students find the common interests between each other. Really, what it comes down to is we create our communities as much as they create us. And I love this button, humankind, be both. We need to be human for our students, and we need to be kind. We need to find ways to create spaces where the humanity comes through and the kindness comes through, even when we disagree, even when we're chatting and sharing ideas, but finding spaces where we understand each other at a level where there are some commonalities and where we aren't just faces on a screen. So there are definitely different layers of community. We have kind of a professor student sense of community. We have a student to student sense of community. We have informal community. And there's even kind of an idea of entire community. Elizabeth, would you mind bringing up the poll, please? All right, folks, you'll see a poll there. What I would like you to do is to say which of these is most important. Is it A, professor student? Is it B, student to student? C, informal? Or D, the entire community? Elizabeth, because you are the poll master, I can't see the results, so can you let us know as they come in?
Sure. Right now we've got 3 for Professor student, 1 for student, student, 1 for informal community, and 17 for entire community, with 6 that have not answered yet. Let me know when you're ready for me to close the poll.
Go ahead and close it. That works. Thank you very much. So just briefly in the chat, give a quick response as to why you selected what you chose. I love this idea that community needs to involve everyone, that no one member is more important than all. We're part of the whole community and no one is more important than the others. So there's this sense that we're all involved. Nice. Yeah. And Savannah, I like this answer that you put in there, that students connecting with one another, always finding a way to maintain those connections with someone else on campus. Wonderful. Excellent. So let's talk about these different types of community. And we're going to come back to the poll answers in a little bit. When you think of a professor to student interaction and community that comes out of that, what comes to your mind? How do you establish this type of community in your courses? Please take a couple minutes to think about that, to really dig into what you've done in the past, and then provide some of your answers in the chat box. We're going to go with about 2 minutes to think about this. There's some great things coming through here. Making sure that you have an open door, making sure that you are empowering your students, that you're being human, sharing stories, making sure that you're responding to students, that you're a part of the actual interaction, sharing, being approachable, being open-minded. Wonderful. I think just as I'm reading through a lot of these responses, one of the things that's really jumping out at me is a lot of these things that we're talking about, the ways that you create connections and interactions with your students. These are the same types of things that are asked and desired in a trauma-informed pedagogy that we talked about yesterday too, and that we'll talk about a bit more tomorrow. Yes, we are partners in the educational journey. It isn't just a one-way street. Nice. Yes, being honest with the students. You're making sure that it's not just us holding court or getting to standing up at the front and talking at our students. It's actually talking with our students. And so there's already a number of wonderful things that you're noting, ways of creating community, and a lot of them have to do with just making sure that there is that sense of engagement, that there is that sense that you are there for your students. They can come to you, and you actually care about what they're doing, what they're trying to do. Building in a range of topics, that's going to be an important thing, because then you're being inclusive of a number of people, of a number of interests, and a number of approaches. So many of these things are coming back to making sure that we're being approachable, that we're establishing trust, that we're thinking about our students, that we are actually trying to bring them into the process. Yeah, humankind. So let's talk about ways that you can actually do this. What are some quick techniques? What are some things that you can do to get to your students and make sure that they know who you are, what you care about, and that you care about them? There's a number of things really that you can take on. If you're thinking about what you can do before the semester, creating a welcome note that you send out to your students is a simple technique, but it's one that's pretty phenomenal. And it's even better when you create a video that goes with it, and you can put that in your Blackboard course shell and your LMS. And basically, what you're doing is, before, especially now when they aren't going to get to walk up to your office, you're saying, "This is who I am. I care about you. I care enough about you that I want to let you know more about what we're coming into. I want you to know who I am, and I don't want to just be a talking head on a screen." It's also not a bad idea to make sure in this welcome note that you actually introduce the course and let them know what the course construct, what the course community is going to be like. Something else that you're doing here is you're beginning to model what it is that you see as being community. If for you, community is interacting, community is sharing, community is building together, then you want to model that for your students. Because let's be completely honest on this one. If you tell your students that you think community is a true natural interaction, and then you cut them off, you have just shown them that you do not actually believe that. And the third one, in the before semester, I mean, you can be available for questions prior to the semester. I mean, I know that there's a lot going on. I know that that we're trying to finish things up and get things going. But especially if you share your syllabus early, being able to answer some questions shows that yes, you're open, you are in this together, and you're excited to establish the sense of community with your students. Now, during the semester, you're going to want to carry these things forward. It's important to have that consistent communication. Video is still your friend, particularly in this environment. One of the things that you can do that shows that you are reaching out and that you want to be seen, you want to share, and you want to be heard, is just creating a weekly video that you send the link to your students. And it can be where you chat about your learning goals. It can be where you chat about what's going on, but it can also be a place where you reach out to them and say, "I am a person, this is what I'm doing." So they get to know you a bit more. Being consistent with your communication, and this is also something that's important in trauma-informed pedagogy, but being consistent with that communication shows that you are staying involved and that you can be trusted. As an assessment scholar, the next thing that I have on this list is one that's really near and dear to my heart, and that's clear feedback that empowers the students while reinforcing the standards. The cool thing about a lot of the literature in feedback is that it says students want you to hold them to strong standards, but they want you to show them how to get there, and they want you to show them that you believe in them and that you will help them get there. That once again creates this sense of trust. It creates this sense that the students know who you are and are able to come to you and talk with you about the things that they're doing in your class. Once again, though, being consistent with your presence also calls the entire group together. If you set up a discussion board and then don't ever return to it, that shows your students that they don't need to be involved in that community. It shows your students that you aren't really invested in that community. So much of creating that professor-student relationship, creating that sense of community, comes through in what we do and in what we show our students. So that's just one of the types of community that we want to talk about today, though. We also have student to student community. So when you think of those student to student interactions, and a lot of you mentioned this in your definitions of community, when you think of student to student interactions, what comes to mind? And how do you make sure that your students are actually connecting with each other? So I'm going to give you 3 minutes for this one. So think about it, write down your answers, and start to place them in the chat box. Teamwork, that's a great one, said, but I'm going to push you one step forward on that. How do you get your students to work together as a team? Required group projects, nice. Icebreaker questions, excellent. Having them actually ask questions of each other, nice. All right, thank you, Seta, for bringing that up. One of the important parts of establishing teamwork in your classes is setting roles and getting students to understand what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to interact. Commonality in assessments, yes. Spontaneous conversations before class, I love it, I love it. Very well phrased, John. Finding a way to create a collective history on a topic. Nice, nice. John, I'm going to reach out to you because I want to know more about that project. That sounds really cool. Adding fun to scholarly topics. Nancy, tell us more. Tell us more. How do you do that? Being there, being with them in different places. Yes, having that actual connection with your students. About 1 more minute, please. 1 more minute. Yes, interactive activities where they are cooperating and challenging and doing things together. Nice. Getting students into small groups. Excellent. Allison, I like that. And I think that we can actually push ourselves to find ways to get our students to interact outside of the classroom. There's so much that's coming out of this right now. Thank you very much for the way you're sharing and the ideas that you're bringing forward. Yeah, finding ways to get students to interact, to cooperate, to challenge, to speak, to learn from one another. This is how we create that student to student interaction. This is how we create that student to student sense of community. When students actually know something about each other, when they have when they have that common experience, when they have that shared history, you're going to get a much stronger sense of community with your between your students. And this is what we talked about earlier. This is a big part of what students were asking for when they were saying we want that face to face. Now, what they wanted is this sense of belonging between each other, the sense of being in it together with the others in the class. So let's talk about ways that you can actually start to do this. Creating the student to student connection before class can be a little bit trickier because the last thing you want to do is create a situation where certain students are being held out because they're coming in on the first day or because they signed up for the class later or things like that. But there are still ways that you can start the process. you can do pre-class icebreakers. You can ask your students to connect with each other through a discussion board. You can make your course open and available prior to the start of the class. You can find ways of asking students um, to connect through you, but at the same time helping them to see the that common place that they will have together. Another thing that you can do is to share curated and safe information about the students with them so that they have a sense of who they're going to be interacting with in the class. Now, once again, I ask that you are very intentional about being ethical about what you're sharing with your students. The last thing we want to do is out one of our students in any way, shape, or form, to put them in front of others in a way that they're not comfortable with, because that is going to destroy your sense of community quickly. You might ask, how do you get this information, the information that you want to curate and share with your students? This is another way that you can do it, is just to send out a survey prior to class, where you get a sense of who your students are, where they're coming from, what their experiences are like, making sure that they can actually interact with you and with others, and to figure out exactly what's going to what might inhibit that community as you move forward. Once you've started to build this sense of community with your students and with each other, then take that forward into the semester. It's easy to think of our synchronous time with our students as something that we should just do. But as Karen Costa talks about, think about your class as a meal or as a sandwich. The bulk of what goes on in the class can be asynchronous. Students can do the reading, they can watch the videos, they can do all that stuff on their own time. They can, if you give them questions on regarding what to think about the reading, how to read it, and how to interact, they can do that elsewhere. And then you can save your synchronous time for the special stuff. And she says, so if the bulk of the class is asynchronous, that synchronous time is your special sauce. That's what you use to bring people together. That's what you use to make sure that people are interacting. And that's what you use to do things that you cannot do in any other format. So think about that synchronous time that you have. Consider it carefully and decide, how can I make the best use of this to enhance student to student community? So that it's not just me talking at my students, so that it is my students talking with each other as well. It can be tough, but we do have a resource I'm going to show you at the end of the workshop. It's one that talks about how to move your discussions online, and it really digs into what can you do to take your favorite form of discussion and use it in an online space to get people to talk with each other and to talk across spaces. Another thing that you can do that's going to be really important is to be sure to set up interaction through your projects and discussions. And this was coming out a lot in the chat. Making sure that you are creating spaces where the students have to be in breakout rooms, where they have to be talking with each other, where they have to be working together towards a common goal. Finding ways to ensure that at a given point in time, in each synchronous session, you're getting your students to say, okay, who's over there? What am I learning from you, my student colleagues? What am I learning about you? And how are we working together to be successful in this course? One of the, you'll hear a lot of people that talk about, they will actually set up study groups with their students, even in an online setting. The cool thing about this is what you're doing is you're creating a way that students can interact without you being there, without you curating it, without you moderating what they're saying, finding those spaces where they can actually interact. And Paul, I believe I saw this in a comment that you placed in there. That can be even just turning on the camera for a synchronous discussion and walking away, leaving that space open, for your students to just chat for a little while, then coming back, starting things up, and then at the end, walking away. Once again, giving your students a space where they can chat, where they can think, and where they can interact with one another. When I've shared this idea, or when I've talked with creating kind of back channel means of discussion for your students so that they can chat, so that they can share, sometimes faculty, and I'm not going to say anyone in this group has said this to me, but sometimes faculty might say, but what if they talk about me? That's okay, because they're going to do that anyway. I mean, think about in our face-to-face classes, the students talked, and part of what they talked about was the instructor, and that's all right. If we are working hard to create that sense of community, working hard to make sure that we're creating that communal space, then we don't have to worry about it as much. We've got at the fourth one a little bit earlier, and this isn't just in breakout rooms, I'll talk about it in that sense, but just in the class as a whole, finding ways to make sure that people understand what their roles are. What are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to do it? Why are they supposed to do it? For I'll share a little bit about me on this one. I hated class discussions. The last thing I wanted to do was raise my hand and put myself out there. And a lot of it was because I'd never been taught how to be a part of a discussion. I'd never had someone actually sit down with me and say, okay, these are some of the types of things you can do. These are some of the ways that you can be involved and not feel like you are on display. So finding ways to help our students know what discussion actually is, what it looks like, and what they can do can take a lot of that pressure off of them and allow them to connect on a deeper level. And that's one of the reasons why discussions can be such a powerful way of creating community, because you do get your students to look, listen, and learn. But this again means that we have to take our time and talk with them about what this means. We have to talk with them about things like active learning. We have to talk with them about what they're actually supposed to do in the discussion, what we want them to get out of the discussion. And one of the best things you can do is at the beginning of the class, actually talk about what participation means and create that communal sense of what do we mean by participation? What do we mean by discussion? What do we mean by interaction? And get all that done together as a group. So now we're going to jump on to the idea of entire community. This one's a little bit more now, this one's a little bit more difficult to define. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes on this one. When you think of creating interactions for the entire community, what comes to mind for you? And how do you establish the type of community, or this type of community, in your courses? We'll go with 3 minutes, please. Etiquette, definitely. Nice. Presentations, group presentations. Nice, awesome. Yes, Seta, I love that. Making sure that the environment is so inclusive and so interactive, they'll be talking about it 20 years later. Yeah, breakout groups, group projects. Excellent. Making connections across the campus. Nice. Nancy, you bring up a great point. Transparent design is a part of this as well. Getting everyone to understand how they're in it together, what's moving forward, why you're doing the things you're doing. Awesome. And making sure that they feel like they belong. Just off the top of my head, as I see Dean Bowie's response there, that you can upload video, music, pics, music like that. Creating a space where your students can share, only if they choose, pictures of what's going on, maybe share their favorite song, things like that, videos. That can go a long way to establishing community. Once again, making sure that they don't feel like they're being forced to share something they don't want to share. Are there any other final thoughts about ways to create that sense of community on a bigger scale? I do love this idea, this sense that it's not just about creating a connection between the professor and the student. It's not just about getting two students to interact with one another, but it's about getting everyone to feel a part of something bigger. In the sense of your class as an entire community, there are a number of things that you can do, a number of techniques that you can use to help establish this or to create this goal. Um, one is one is the pre-class survey. Once again, getting a sense of who your students are, so that you can start to talk about the trends of the class as a whole, what you have that's coming together as a whole, who you are as a community. Your welcome note and your video, we talked about this in creating a connection between you and your students, but this is another way where you reinforce that we're in this together, that it's us as a group that are doing our best to connect and be successful. And creating that low stakes discussion board prior to the start of class, where students can actually talk and see and interact with each other, or yes, using VoiceThread as well, finding ways to get students to see, to talk, to communicate across lines and beyond just single student to student interactions. It's also crucial, though, that you once again bring in the sense that we are in this together in terms of what the class is all about. So anything you can do to help establish those communal values, those communal expectations, it's going to go a long way towards creating an entire group community. Things like negotiating the syllabus and saying, okay, what in here is working for you, what isn't, and as a group, how can we figure out how to make this something that reflects what we all value and what we all care about. Another thing that I can't reinforce enough is that what you do at the beginning of your class establishes what happens for the rest of the class. So if you truly want the sense of the class working as a community, make sure and do that at the beginning of your class. Make sure that that first week is where you are talking with each other, where you're getting the students to know each other, where you are finding ways to get them to understand more about who they are. Icebreakers are great for this. A friend of ours who wrote a fabulous book called Geeky Pedagogy, asked her students to share their academic superpowers at the beginning to get a sense of what they're bringing to the class situation, what they're bringing to the group, and just in a fun way to get them to see who they kind of associate with. When I was teaching advanced public speaking online, one of the things that I would do is ask my students to record a 1-minute award acceptance speech for any award they choose to make up. And you learn so much about the students, and they would laugh and they would joke and they would comment on each other's videos because they got a sense of who these people were, what they cared about, and what made them who they are. That sense of community really emerged. You can also be sure what to take those processes, to take the ideas and the things that you do and the things that you establish in that first week and move them throughout the entire semester. Your icebreakers don't have to be something you do on day one and then leave behind. Do different icebreakers throughout the semester to get people talking about different things, sharing in different ways, and continually learning about one another. The more you can do to get students to find those common connections with each other and with you and to see that you're all in it together, the stronger that sense of entire community is going to be. So now let's talk about one more, informal community. So when you think about informal interaction and what that does for your classroom, what comes to mind? Also, how do you make sure and establish informal community in your courses? We've already touched on this a little bit, but I want to dig into it as a separate space. Let's take 4 minutes to think about this and then put your thoughts in there. And Susan, we are actually working on an index of online tools. It's going to take us a little bit to get more things out there, but that is something that the CTL is trying to bring together. Nice. So creating meet and greets, great idea. Finding ways to just talk with your students about what's going on in the world, also great. Those informal discussions are really important. That's where you show that you're human too. Nice. A couple more minutes, friend. How can you find those ways to establish informal community? And discussion boards where your students can interact with each other about any topic that they want to chat about. Group office hours. That sounds like fun. Another 30 seconds or so. Get those ideas in the chat box. Nice. So we're really hitting at a number of different things where you're creating places for your students to interact with you informally, places where they can interact with each other informally. Think about how much of what we do in our community happens informally, where we're just chatting, where we're just interacting and talking about whatever's on our mind and finding ways to connect just as people. This is an important part of what goes on in a classroom setting. It doesn't always have to be about the discipline or the content. Sometimes there just needs to be a space for students and you and the students to connect. Some of the things that you can do to help with this would be to ask your students to connect with the class goals, to connect those things to spaces outside of the classroom. Ask them to talk about where they're seeing what's going on in the content, but where they see it elsewhere, and to bring that into a discussion forum. Once again, this is a kind of a safe way of helping people to understand what's going on outside of the classroom, what they're interacting with outside of the classroom. The reason why this can help with informal community is that's where students can say, okay, I see that you are noticing this about your home spaces. You're noticing this about your hometown. And that creates places where they can start to share and interact in those more informal ways. A huge thing that you can do for creating an informal community is to actually connect your students to the entire university experience. It doesn't have to be just about what goes on in a classroom or in that shared classroom idea. There's a lot of stuff happening at the University of Laverne, even virtually. And so finding ways to get your students to make use of those opportunities, whether it's the online yoga or the online meditation, the things like that, the stuff that's going on at ASC, the different activities that are part of ULV as a whole, and getting students to connect with each other in those spaces as well. Because community does extend beyond just us in that one classroom environment. There was a study, I'm going to have to go back and find it, but there was a study that was done in the I want to say early 2000s, where they took a look at students' dorm rooms. And what they found was that if a student had like something that had the university's name or logo on it in their dorm room, they were probably going to stick out that first semester. If they didn't, the chances of them actually dropping out were much higher. And it's because that sense of community, it's because that connection to what the entire place is as a whole. Some other things that you can do during the semester are to create synchronous spaces where students can connect without you. Once again, finding ways where they can chat with each other, that you aren't involved, that you aren't in curating, where they can just be who they are. That's the ideas that we've talked about prior to this, where you open up your space and let people chat with you not there, encouraging students to connect through Google Chats, things like that. Just finding ways where you are helping them to interact synchronously, but also finding those spaces where they can interact asynchronously without you. Those discussion boards, the group work where they're emailing, things like that, where they are making those connections and they know that it's about them and not about you and them. So, poll master Elizabeth Wellens, would you mind now pulling up one more poll? The question for this is now, which of these is the most important? Is it professor, student, student to student, entire community, informal community, or all of the above? Elizabeth, as the answers come in, will you please share them with us?
So far, out of the 31 participants currently in the course, in this section, all of them have selected E, all of the above.
Good, because that's the right answer. Thank you very much. Oh, friends. Um, I want to point out something about what we've been doing here today. When you look at the chat box, what are some of the things that you noticed about the ways that you all were interacting? Was it just you answering me, or were you actually chatting with each other? Definitely. You were connecting with each other. You were talking in multiple forms. You were chatting with me, but you were also connecting and saying, okay, I like this idea. I like what you did here. It wasn't just unidirectional. It wasn't just call and response. And the nice thing about this is there were times that I had my camera off. You don't have the ability to see each other at this point in time. So it's not about that face-to-face connection, but still you were connecting with each other around this idea. You were talking with each other, you were learning with each other, and you were growing together. So even though all of our faces weren't on a screen, there was still a sense of we're in it together and a sense of community that was being built. So let's talk about this. When you think about your class, when you think about what's going to happen in the fall, what's one thing that you want to do that's going to further enhance this sense of community between you and your students, between your students to students, or your students to the rest? What's one thing you want to do? Oh, and Susan, to answer your question real quick, the polls in Webex are actually super, super easy to do. We can put together a resource and show you how to do that. For Zoom, I think you have to have administrative rights to do polls. It's a little more difficult there. So what are some of the other things that you're going to do to create that sense of community in your courses? I love all of these different ways that are coming up in the chat box about how to actually get people to interact and learn more about each other. Yeah, finding ways to get all your students to be involved in discussion. That's definitely a good one. Creative, inclusive environments. That's an important part of establishing community. Check-ins, yes. Yeah, the water cooler forum. So let's take a few more minutes to keep sharing these ideas because there's a lot of great ones that are coming up.
Jeremy, you're muted.
All right, so yeah, that doesn't help community when I'm muted. So actually, maybe it does, because that way you don't have to hear my voice for a while. But anyway, I'm really impressed with the things that are coming up. I want to say thank you very much for the ways that you all are sharing. I wanted to say that I truly appreciate the openness that you're bringing to this workshop. There is a question about attendance and requiring attendance. I would love to chat with you about that later, because a lot of that depends on what you're trying to do, what your goals are, and what you're trying to get out of attendance. Attendance doesn't always equal learning. A lot of times it's also about the way you use the engagement. Anyway, you're doing truly beautiful things here. I can't thank you enough for all that you've brought together on this. As I noted, there are some additional resources that can help if you want more ideas or want just things that you can talk about in terms of how to create community. In the CTL Online and in the new Learning Commons teaching resources page, you can find an entire thing on how to take your discussions online, a handout on creating community online, and a different handout on how to establish online or how to establish community beforehand. This is the one I was talking about before. It digs into why discussions fail, provides some specific discussion techniques, and looks at how you can use those in both asynchronous and synchronous courses. We also have a ton of other things, so please feel free to take a look at the resources in those spaces, and we would love to chat with you more about those. So we are done a little bit early. Are there any other questions that you have? Because if not, I will gladly give you these 10 minutes back. And thank you again for the wonderful interaction we had today. If you do have any questions at any point in time after this, please do contact us at the ctl@laverne.edu. And we look forward to continually building the sense of community that we have with you all.